The wind did not just blow, it screamed. It came down from the high peaks of the Wyoming range like a blade, sharp enough to peel the bark from the pines and the hope from a person's heart. Clara Hale felt it in her teeth. She pulled the thin wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, but it was like trying to stop a bullet with paper. The wind found every gap in her clothing, every small tear in her resolve. She was cold, a deep, invasive cold that had started in her fingers 2 hours ago and was now working its way into her bones. Her mules, Jed and Sal, were worse off. They stood with their heads low, tails pointed into the gale, their breath pluming in the thin, freezing air. They were good mules, steady and strong, but this trail was meant for goats and desperate men, not a rickety wagon loaded with the last remnants of a life. Clara was miles from Lander, and miles farther from anything that resembled mercy. She was headed west, or at least she had been, trying to put enough mountain and prairie between herself and the whispers. But the whispers, she was learning, traveled faster than a wagon. She was guiding the mules over a patch of treacherous, ice-slicked shale, her hands raw on the reins. When the sound came, it was not the howl of the wind or the groan of the wagon boards. It was a sharp, brittle crack, like a dry bone snapping under a boot. The wagon lurched violently to the left. Clara was thrown sideways, catching herself against the wagon bed. Jed brayed, a panicked, terrible sound. She knew, before she even climbed down into the ankle-deep snow, she knew. The rear axle, made of ironwood that was supposed to be unbreakable, had split clean in two. The left wheel was canted inward at a drunken angle, the heavy wagon bed resting squarely on the frozen rock. It was finished. Clara Hale stood very still. She looked at the broken axle. She looked at the mules, who watched her with wide, knowing eyes. She looked up the trail, a narrow ribbon of white disappearing into a black forest of pine. Then she looked back the way she had come, which was just more of the same. The snow, which had been a lazy, threatening flurry all morning, began to fall in earnest. Thick, heavy flakes that did not drift. They dove. "Well," she said aloud, her voice stolen by the wind, "that is that." She was not a woman given to tears. Tears were a luxury, and she had been poor for a long time. Panic was worse. Panic was a betrayal. Panic got you killed. Her late husband, Amos, had been a panicky man, all loud noise and sudden rages. Look where it got him. Clara was a creature of cold calculation. She unhitched Jed and Sal from the wreck. They would freeze if they stood still. She tied them to a low-hanging pine, where they had some small shelter from the wind, from the wagon. She pulled her remaining supplies. It was a pitiful collection. Half a sack of flour, now damp, a slab of salt pork, a dwindling tin of coffee, a small canvas sack with her only other dress and her husband's shaving razor. And her rifle, it was an old Spencer, heavy and reliable, but she only had 5 cartridges left for it. She needed fire. Her gloves were threadbare, the wool worn through at the knuckles and fingertips. Her hands were stiff, the color of raw liver. She gathered twigs and branches, breaking the larger ones over her knee. The wood was damp, stubborn. She used precious pages from her small Bible, the ones from Leviticus she never much cared for, as tinder. She struck a lucifer match, cupping the tiny, sulphurous flame against the wind. It caught. The fire was small, smoky, and mean. It gave off more spite than heat. Clara huddled over it, trying to force feeling back into her hands. The snow was coming faster now, piling up around her boots, hissing as it hit the edges of the fire. The landscape was not just harsh, it was judgmental. The jagged stones looked like broken teeth. The frozen pines crowded in, their branches heavy with the new snow, waiting. The sky was a low, bruised purple. Night was coming on fast. She shivered, a deep, racking shudder that shook her whole body. She knew the arithmetic of survival. A woman alone, a broken wagon, a blizzard. The answer was simple. She had perhaps 3 hours until the cold stopped her shivering, and then the quiet would come. She was thinking about this, thinking about the irony of escaping the judgment of the town only to be sentenced by the mountain, when she heard the sound. It was not the wind, it was not the mules. It was the click-click of a rifle hammer being drawn to full cock. Clara froze. The sound was close, too close. It came from the trees, just beyond the weak circle of her firelight. She did not reach for her Spencer. It was too far. Leaning against the wagon wheel, she simply turned her head. Slowly. He emerged from the dark trees like a ghost, separating himself from the shadow of a massive blue spruce. He was on horseback, a rough-looking Appaloosa with a patchy coat that matched the snow-dusted stone. The man was tall, or seemed so in the saddle. He wore a long canvas duster, dark with wet, and a hat pulled low, its brim heavy with snow. In the crook of his arm, he held a rifle. It was not pointed at her, it was just ready. He did not speak, he just watched her. His horse stamped a hoof, the sound muffled. Clara's heart, which had been a slow, cold drum, gave a painful kick. She knew him. Not personally. No one knew him personally, but she knew of him. This was Eli Tanner. The town of Lander had its share of rough men, but Tanner was different. He was not a drunk or a gambler. He was a recluse. He lived somewhere up on this mountain, in a cabin no one had ever admitted to seeing. He came to town twice a year. They said, for salt, cartridges, and flour. He spoke to no one. He looked at no one. The rumors about him were dark. They said he had ridden with a hard crew down in Colorado. They said he had been a rustler, a gunman. They whispered that he had killed men, not in fair fights, but in ambushes. They said he was wanted, or haunted, or both. And here he was, 10 feet away, his rifle in his hand, his eyes hidden by the shadow of his hat. He was wary. His gaze moved from Clara, to the broken wagon, to the mules, and back to her face. He was assessing the situation, not as a rescue, but as an intrusion. Clara knew desperation, but she would not show it. Pride was the only thing she owned outright. She had faced down the Reverend Blevins when he called her a sinner in the street. She had faced down the mercantile owner who suggested she pay her husband's debts in other ways. She would face this man, too. She rose to her feet, slowly, letting him see her hands. She was a small woman, but she stood straight. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was steady, though it felt rusty. Eli Tanner said nothing. He just watched. The silence stretched. The fire crackled. The snow fell. Clara could feel the cold seeping back into her chest. She had to break this. A bitter, sharp humor rose in her. It was the only weapon she had. "You planning to shoot me? Or just watch me freeze?" she asked. "Seems like freezing would be quieter." His face did not move. He was weather-beaten, his skin the texture of old leather. He looked, she thought, about 40, a hard 40. "I got no silver," she pushed on, the words sharp as glass. She was desperate, and it made her reckless. She tried to make it sound like a tease, a joke to break the tension, but it came out sounding like a curse. "I suppose I'll have to pay you in skin." It was a terrible thing to say, a thing the women in town whispered she was capable of. She said it to shock him, to make him see her as a person, even a bad one, and not just a bundle of rags. Eli Tanner did not smile. His expression did not change. If anything, his eyes, which she could just barely see, seemed to get colder. He looked at the axle. He looked at the sky, which was almost black. "You will be dead by morning," he said. His voice was rough, like stones dragging. It sounded like it had not been used in a long time. "I am aware of the forecast," Clara said. He sat on his horse, a statue of man and beast. He was deciding. Clara could feel the weight of his decision. He was deciding whether to ride on, Whether to leave her to the wind and the white? It was. She thought, what most men would do. It was the sensible thing. She was trouble. The town had made that clear. He let out a long breath. It plumed in front of his face. "This storm is closing the pass," he said. Not to her, but to the mountain. "It will be 3 days, maybe 4. He looked back at her. "I am not dragging a body out of this drift come spring." He swung his leg over the saddle and dropped to the snow. He was tall and solid. He walked over to her mules. He ran a hand over Jed's neck, checking the animal's condition. "Get your things," he commanded. "1 bag." Clara stared. "Get my things?" "You are riding the mule. The other will follow." He did not look at her. He was already checking the cinch on her mule's harness. "My cabin is 2 miles. It is not far, but it is hard going." He turned back to her, his face impatient. "Move. If you freeze, it is on you. I will not carry you." Relief and terror warred inside her. She was being saved, but by a man rumored to be a killer. She thought of the whispers, of the dark things he had supposedly done. But then she felt the wind cut through her again, and she knew she had no choice. She grabbed her small canvas sack and her rifle. "I will not leave the rifle," she said. He gave her a look, something between annoyance and, perhaps, respect. "Fine, tie it to the saddle, but if you fall, I am not coming back for it." The ride was brutal. It was, as he had promised, hard going. He put her on Jed, the stronger mule. He tied Sal to Jed's harness, and he led the way on his Appaloosa. He did not ride on the trail. He was the trail. He moved through the trees, ducking under low-hanging, snow-laden boughs, finding paths that were invisible to her. The snow was knee-deep now, and the world had shrunk to the broad, dark back of the man in front of her. It was a wordless journey. The only sounds were the howling of the wind high in the pines, the muffled plod, plod, plod of the animals, and the constant, weary creak of cold leather. Clara's body went numb. She could no longer feel her feet in her boots, or her hands, even tucked under her arms. She focused on his back to keep from falling. She watched the man. He rode with an easy, balanced grace, as if he and the horse were one animal. He was never surprised. When a branch cracked under its weight of snow and fell, he did not flinch. He just moved his horse around it. She studied his hands on the reins. They were gloved, but the gloves were worn. She could see the skin underneath. His knuckles were scarred, and a long, pale line ran from his wrist to his thumb on his left hand. A knife wound, she guessed, or maybe a rope burn. His quiet eyes, when he glanced back once to make sure she was still following, were not calm. They were watchful. They were the eyes of a man who expects trouble from every direction at all times. After what felt like a lifetime, when Clara was sure she could not hold on for 1 more minute, he stopped. "We are here," he said. She looked around. She saw nothing but trees and a steep slope of rock. Then he moved his horse aside, and she saw it. The cabin was tucked into the slope, built so snugly against the granite rock face that it seemed to be part of the mountain. It was small, weather-beaten, and dark. The logs were old, chinked with mud and moss. A thin, gray thread of smoke rose from a stone chimney and was immediately ripped away by the wind. It was a place built to be hidden. He dismounted and helped her down. His hands were rough, and his grip on her arm was like iron. She stumbled, her legs numb, and he held her steady for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he dropped his hand as if her skin had burned him. He led the animals into a small lean-to built off the side of the cabin, a space just big enough for the 3 beasts. Then he pushed open the heavy wooden door to the cabin. The inside was dim. A wave of warmth hit her, shocking her frozen face. It was a single room, low-ceilinged. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, a healthy fire crackling inside. It smelled of pine smoke, coffee, leather, and something else, something metallic, like gun oil. It was a man's room, stark, clean, and empty of comfort. There was a rough-hewn table with one chair. Shelves held tins of food, a few books, and boxes of cartridges. A single cot was pushed against the far wall, covered with a stack of thick blankets. Eli Tanner did not speak. He pointed to the fire. "Sit." Clara moved stiffly, collapsing onto a small wooden stool near the hearth. The heat was painful as it touched her skin. She pulled off her ruined gloves. Her fingers were white and waxy. He went to the fire, where a black pot hung from a hook. He ladled a tin cup full of something and handed it to her. "It is broth," he said. "Venison. Drink it." She took it with both hands. The tin was scalding, but she held on, desperate for the warmth. The broth was thin, but it was hot, and it tasted of salt and wild things. It burned a trail down her throat and into her belly. She drank it all, her hands shaking. He watched her. He did not eat. He just stood by the other side of the fire, watching her as if she were a wounded animal he had brought in, one he was not sure would bite. When she was finished, he took the cup. He pointed to the cot. "That is the bed," he said. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. By the fire, he gestured to a corner where a threadbare blanket roll was already laid out. It was clear this was his habit. She was too tired to argue, too cold to feel shame. She was a widow, and he was a man. But in this storm, those things felt distant. She was a body, alive, and he was another. She moved to the cot. It was firm, but the blankets were thick. She lay down, still in her damp dress and boots. She could not find the energy to take them off. The cot smelled like him, that scent of smoke and cold air and gun oil. It was not comforting. He tended to the fire, adding a large log. He checked the action on his rifle, which he leaned against the wall by his blanket. Then he sat down, his back to the stone, and wrapped himself in the blanket. He didn't take off his duster or his boots. Within minutes, the cabin was silent, save for the fire and the unending, deafening roar of the blizzard outside. That night, Clara dreamed. She dreamed she was back in her small house outside Lander. She dreamed of her husband, Amos. He was not the angry man she remembered, but the man he had become at the end, confused, weak, and mean. In the dream, he was at the bottom of the stairs. He was trying to breathe, but he could not. His face was turning a dark, terrible purple, and his eyes were wide, staring up at her. He was making a sound, a thick, wet, gurgling sound. He was choking on his own blood. She stood at the top of the stairs, her hands clean, her heart frozen. She just watched. Clara Hale woke with a scream caught in her throat. It came out as a raw, torn gasp. She was sitting bolt upright on the cot. Her heart was hammering. The cabin was dark. The fire burned low, casting long, monstrous shadows. He was there. He was not in his corner. He was standing in the middle of the small room, halfway between his spot and her bed. In his right hand, he held a pistol, pointed at the floor. He had woken from a dead sleep, on his feet and armed, before her scream had even finished. They stared at each other in the dying light of the fire. He saw the terror on her face. He saw her chest heaving. He saw she was no threat. Slowly, he lowered the pistol. He did not ask her what was wrong. He did not ask what she dreamed. He did not offer a single word of comfort. He just stared. His eyes, in the low light, were flat, assessing. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle he did not care to solve, only to understand well enough to know she would not hurt him. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, satisfied she was not about to lose her mind, he nodded once, a short, sharp movement. He turned his back on her, walked back to his blanket roll, and sat down by the fire. Clara pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. She was shaking, but not from the cold. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry animal. The storm had worsened. The sound of it was a physical weight, pressing in on the small cabin. She went to the single, small window. It was thick with frost. She scraped a small circle clear with her fingernail and peered out. She could see nothing. Not the trees, not the mountain, not the lean-to. Just a solid, swirling wall of white. The snow was high, already halfway up the cabin door. The world was gone. She was not just stranded. She was trapped in a box on the side of a mountain, with a blizzard for a jailer, and a man rumored to have killed for a cellmate. The first day was silence and wind. The second day was the same. The blizzard did not pause for breath. It just screamed. The world outside the one frosted window was a frantic, swirling white. The snow piled up, burying the cabin to the sills, and then to the middle of the door. Each morning, Eli Tanner would take the shovel, push his shoulder against the heavy door until the top edge broke free of the drift, and carve a narrow canyon out to the lean-to. The mules in his Appaloosa were safe, their body heat keeping the small space from freezing solid. He would feed them, water them with melted snow, and then come back inside, bringing a gust of ice and powder with him. Clara, trapped, felt the walls press in. She was not a woman built for idleness. It felt too much like debt. She had to earn the heat from his fire, the broth from his pot. So she worked. His cabin was clean, but it was the clean of a man who does not see dust, only disorder. She found a broom of bound twigs and she swept the floor, the sound harsh in the quiet. She organized his tins of salt, coffee, and beans. She found his mending kit, a twist of sinew thread, a few thick needles, and a block of wax. His duster, hanging from a peg, had a long tear in the seam under the arm. She took it down. The canvas was stiff with dried mud and old sweat, but it was a good coat. She sat on the stool by the fire, her hands clumsy from the cold, and she sewed. Her stitches were small and tight, a perfect straight line. Eli sat in the corner, on his blanket roll. He was cleaning his guns. He had 3, the rifle, the pistol he had pulled on her, and a second revolver, older, with a worn handle. He took them apart, piece by piece, oiled them, and put them back together. It was a ritual. It was a way to hold something without having to feel. He did not talk to her. He avoided her. If she was near the fire, he sat by the dark window. If she went to the window, he would check the woodpile. But he watched her. Clara could feel his eyes on her back when she was kneading a stiff, flat dough from his flour and water. She felt his gaze settle on her hands. When she was mending the duster, she felt him watching her profile, lit by the fire. The moment she turned, his eyes would be gone, focused on a trigger mechanism or the flame. The silence in that cabin was a living thing. It was heavier than the snow on the roof. On the third day, the talk started. It had to. The quiet was too loud. "I seen that brand before," Clara said, nodding to an old leather vest he had thrown over a chest. The brand was a circle W. He looked up from his knife, which he was sharpening. "Where?" "Texas," she said. "Heard they were a hard crew. Rode for the Whitlow Ranch. They were a hard crew." He said. He tested the blade on his thumb. "Hard or just thieves?" she asked, not looking up from her mending. "Both," he said. "They were handy with a running iron, handier with a gun." "You rode with them?" It was not a question. "For a time, a man does what he has to eat." "That's what they all say," Clara said, biting the thread. "Rustling is one thing. Gun work is another. That crew was known for gun work. They shot 2 homesteaders over a water dispute." Eli stopped sharpening. He laid the stone down. "I was young, and I was mean." Clara finally looked at him. His eyes were flat, looking at a place she could not see. "What made you quit?" He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. The fire popped, a log splitting in 2. Someone begged me not to kill, he said. His voice was so low she barely heard it. The way he said it, it was not a story of mercy. It was a story of failure. Did you listen? She whispered. He looked at his hands, the scarred ones. I stopped, but not before, not for him. The confession hung in the air between them. Thick as smoke, he had given her a piece of his darkness. Now the silence demanded hers. He did not ask. He was not a man who pried. He waited. The town, she said, her voice tight. Lander, they shunned me. Eli went back to his knife, the shing, shing, shing of steel on stone filling the room. My husband, Amos, he died. He died badly. The town, they blame me. They say I did it. She remembered the faces of the women in the mercantile, turning their backs on her. She remembered Reverend Blevins, pointing a finger from his pulpit, talking about Jezebel. They locked me out of the church, she said, the words tasting like ash. Said my shadow wasn't fit to cross the threshold. Whispers. Every time I bought flour, they'd stop talking when I came close, then start again when I left. Eli did not offer comfort. He did not say, they're wrong or I'm sorry. He just stopped sharpening and looked at her. He truly looked. There was no pity in his eyes. There was no judgment. There was just recognition. He was a man who knew what it was to be haunted, to be judged by whispers. Did you? He asked. Not did you kill him, just the words. Did you? Clara's hands clenched in her lap. He was a drunk, and he was cruel. She stared into the fire. He fell, that is all. He fell. Eli nodded once. He accepted the wall she put up. He went back to his knife. The storm howled on. Day 4, day 5. The world was nothing but the four walls of the cabin and the white rage outside. The air between them had changed. It was not the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of two people who knew the other was damaged. It was a brittle, tense thing. Clara was trying to fix the stovepipe. The wind had shifted, and a downdraft was forcing smoke back into the room, making their eyes water. She stood on the stool, trying to jam a damp rag into the joint where the pipe met the chimney stone. It's too hot, Eli said, not looking up. You'll burn. I have to stop the smoke, she snapped, her nerves raw from the confinement. We cannot breathe. She pushed harder. The rag slipped. The soft, pale skin of her palm and forearm scraped against the scalding hot cast iron. Clara cried out, a sharp, ragged gasp of pain, and fell back off the stool, clutching her hand to her chest. Tears of pure, hot agony sprang to her eyes. Before she had even hit the floor, he was moving. He moved like a cat, silent and fast. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not coddle her. He grabbed her by the good arm, hauled her to her feet, and kicked the cabin door open. A wall of snow and freezing air blasted inside. He shoved her burned hand deep into the snowdrift that was level with the doorway. Hold it there, he commanded. The cold was a second shock, a clean, white fire that fought the hot, black one. Clara gasped, her teeth chattering, but she did as she was told. He stood beside her, his body blocking the worst of the wind. He grabbed her wrist, not to hurt her, but to hold her steady, to keep her hand buried in the snow. It will blister bad, he said, his voice low. She was trembling. From the shock, from the cold, from the pain. He was just solid. His grip on her wrist was the only thing that felt real. She looked down at his hand holding hers. His fingers were long, the knuckles scarred. His thumb rested against the frantic pulse in her wrist. He was looking at her arm, at the angry red welt that disappeared into the snow. She started to say. Be quiet, he said, not unkindly, just firmly. After a long minute, he pulled her hand out. The skin was bright red, but the snow had taken the worst of the fire out of it. He looked up. His eyes met hers. It was the first time they had looked at one another without suspicion, without judgment. She saw the lines around his eyes, lines carved by sun and wind, but also by something else, something that looked like grief. He saw the terror in her eyes, the pain she was trying to swallow. The world shrank to the space between them, the wind, the snow, the cabin. It all went quiet. Then he blinked. The moment was broken. He dropped her hand as if it were a hot coal. He turned away from her, back into the cabin. "There is a tin of axle grease on the shelf," he said, his back to her. "Put it on the burn. It will keep the air out." He grabbed his hat and duster. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice shaking. "To check the mules," he said, and plunged out into the storm, leaving her alone with the pain. The tension in the cabin grew thick after that. It was a living, breathing thing. They moved around each other with a new, strange awareness. Every time their sleeves brushed, it felt like a jolt. The small cabin was shrinking, the air charged. They were running low on wood. The blizzard had not let up. It was day 6. Cabin fever had set in. It was a gray, sour feeling. Clara felt trapped. She was pacing, 3 steps one way, 3 steps the other. Eli was sitting, staring at the fire, his body so still he looked like he was carved from the same rock as the chimney. Clara felt that familiar, bitter recklessness rise in her, the kind of sharp-tongued humor that was more shield than sword. "This is becoming a long visit, Mr. Tanner," she said, trying to make her voice light. He grunted. "I am eating your food, using your blankets. I hope you are keeping a tally." She forced a brittle smile. "What will you charge me for shelter now? My mending skills cannot be worth this much." He turned his head, slowly. He looked at her. His eyes were not cold. They were dark, and something in them flickered. He remembered her joke from the trail. The desperate, ugly one. "Not your skin," he said. The words were flat, devoid of any humor. It was not a tease. It was a rejection of the premise. He was telling her, "That thing you offered, that cheap coin you thought you could spend, it has no value here." Shame washed over her, hot and fast, worse than the burn. He had seen the ugliest, most desperate part of her, and he was handing it back. She turned away, her face burning. Later that night, the anger came. It was a hot, pure thing. Anger at him, for his silence, for his judgment. Anger at the storm. Anger at Amos for dying. Anger at the town, for casting her out. She spun on him. He was by the fire, sharpening his knife again. Always the knife, or the guns. Always a weapon. "Damn you! Why do you do that?" she demanded. He did not look up. "Do what?" "Treat me like a ghost. I am right here. I am a person in your cabin. And you look through me. You pull away like I am sick, like I am a leper." He stopped sharpening. He laid the knife on his knee. "You're not a ghost," he said to the fire. "Then what? Why? Am I so terrible to look at? Am I so stained by what they say I did that you cannot even bear to speak to me?" He stood up. He was a tall man, and in the small, firelit cabin, he seemed to fill the space. He took a step toward her. She held her ground, though her heart was hammering. "I know you are not a ghost," he said again. His voice was rough, like pulling a rope over stone. "Ghosts are cold. They do not bother me." He was close now. She could feel the heat coming off him, see the way the firelight caught the gray in his beard. "You," he said, and he looked right at her, his eyes pinning her. "You are not cold. You are fire, and I burn too easy." It was not an insult. It was a confession. She saw it then. He was not avoiding her because he hated her. He was avoiding her because he was terrified. This man, who lived with guns and faced down blizzards, was afraid of her, afraid of the life, the heat, the feeling she brought into his cold, dead-bolted world. He stood there, closer than he had ever been, breathing the same small pocket of air. Then he broke. He grabbed his duster from the peg. "The wood," he muttered. "I need to check the wood." And he was gone, pushing his way out into the dark and the endless, screaming wind, choosing the blizzard over her. He was gone a long time, so long that the anger in Clara's chest turned to a cold, hard knot of fear. The wind was a predator. A man could get turned around in 5 feet. He could walk off adrift. He could freeze. She was standing at the door, her hand on the latch, ready to go out after him, when it finally opened. He stumbled in, a human-shaped block of snow and ice. His beard was frozen solid. He did not look at her. He just went to the fire and shook, shedding ice and snow onto the hearth. That night, the cold in the cabin was a physical thing. The fire seemed to sink, and the wind found a new crack in the chinking, sending a knife blade of a draft across the floor. Clara lay on the cot, wrapped in every blanket she had. Across the room, Eli sat in his corner, wrapped in his blanket roll, his back to the stone wall. She heard his breathing deepen, then catch in a shiver. He was asleep, but he was cold. She watched him for a long time. In the low, red light of the dying embers, his face was unguarded. The hardness was gone. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had not known a single moment of peace in a decade. She could not stand it. Quietly, she got up from the cot. She took the thickest wool blanket, the one he had given her. She walked across the cold floor. She stood over him. He was shivering, a deep, bone-rattling shake. Even in his sleep. This felt more dangerous than touching his shave. This was an invasion. She bent down. She unfolded the blanket and started to lay it over his shoulders. His hand shot out like a rattlesnake. He was not asleep, or he slept like a wolf, with one eye open. He had her wrist. His grip was iron, instinctive, violent. His eyes were wide and feral, confused by sleep, seeing only a threat in the dark. Clara froze. She did not scream. "You are cold," she whispered. Just that. He stared at her. His grip was tight enough to bruise. He looked at her face, then at the blanket in her other hand. The wildness in his eyes slowly faded. The man came back. He saw her. He saw the blanket. He let go of her wrist. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything. He just dropped his hand, pulled the new blanket up over his shoulder, and turned his head away from her, facing the fire. Clara stood there for a moment, rubbing her wrist. Then she went back to the cot. The next morning, the world was born new. Clara woke to a profound, shocking silence. The wind was gone. She sat up. The cabin was filled with a bright, clean, blue-white light. The storm had broken. Sunlight, dazzling and bright, was pouring through the top of the frosted window. Eli was already up, and he was different. The tense, dark energy was gone. He was moving with a lighter step. He was whistling, a low, tuneless sound, as he boiled water over the fire. He poured the hot water into a bowl. He hung his small, cracked piece of mirror from a nail, and he pulled out a straight razor. Clara watched, fascinated. She had packed her husband's things in a daze, not even knowing what she was taking. She recognized the razor. It was Amos's. Eli lathered his face with a coarse brown soap. He began to shave, scraping away the thick, dark beard of the storm. With each pass of the razor, a new man emerged, a man with a strong jaw, a defined mouth, and more scars than she had realized. He was younger than she had thought, or maybe just less old. He shaved his neck, his cheeks, his chin, but he missed a spot, a small patch of dark stubble, right on the hard line of his jaw, just below his ear. Clara did not think. She did not plan. She just moved. She rose from the cot and walked to him. He saw her in the small mirror. He stopped, the razor held in midair. He tensed. Expecting what? An attack? An argument? She raised her hand, her left hand, the one that was not burned. "You missed a spot," she said. Her voice was soft. She touched him. Her fingers, still rough from the cold, brushed against his jaw. His skin was warm, damp, and rough with the stubble he had missed. Eli stopped breathing. He did not turn. He just watched her in the mirror. He watched her hand on his face. His free hand, the one not holding the razor, moved. He gripped her waist. It was not a violent grip, like the one on her wrist. It was not gentle. It was a grip that said, "I am holding you." It was a grip that claimed. He pulled her slightly, just an inch, until the side of her body was pressed against his. They stood like that for a full 10 seconds. Her fingers on his jaw, his hand on her waist. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing between them. The cabin was absolutely silent. She could feel the solid muscle of his side, the heat of his body through her dress and his shirt. He said nothing. She said nothing. Then, slowly, as if it pained him, he let his hand fall away from her waist. Clara took her hand back from his face. He turned back to the mirror, his expression unreadable, and, with a slightly shaking hand, finished shaving the spot she had touched. That night, the world outside was still and frozen, glittering under a million stars. The war with the wind was over. They ate their meal of salted venison and hard biscuits in a new silence. It was not the silence of strangers, or the silence of secrets. It was a waiting silence. When it was time to sleep, Clara looked at the cot in the cold corner. Eli looked at his blanket roll. Then he looked at the wide, flat stones of the hearth, still radiating the day's heat. "The floor is warmest," he said. It was not an invitation. It was a statement of fact. He laid his blanket roll near the fire, on one side. Clara paused. She looked at the cot, then at him. She took her own blankets. She walked to the hearth. She laid her bedroll down on the other side of the fire. There was a space between them. A respectable, careful 3 feet of stone. He lay down, facing the fire. She lay down, facing the fire. They did not speak. They did not touch. But she could hear him breathe. She could feel the steady, radiating warmth of his body, even from 3 feet away. The fire crackled. She closed her eyes. She did not dream of choking or of falling. She was not alone. The snow had stopped, but the world was locked in ice. The silence that followed the storm was louder than the blizzard had ever been. It was a still, bright, breathless quiet. The sun on the snow crust was blinding. In the cabin, the new dynamic held. They slept by the fire, 2 separate bedrolls on the warm hearthstone, close enough to share heat, far enough apart to be decent. But the truce was fragile. The touch on his jaw, his hand on her waist. It was a thing that had happened, and now it sat in the air between them. A second fire, and they did not know what to do with it. On the 3rd day after the storm, Clara felt the need to clean. It was a nervous, restless energy, while Eli was outside, checking his snares for rabbits. She took to the cot. He had not slept in it since the first night, but it had become his space, where he sat, where he kept his things. She smoothed the blankets, folded them tight, and that is when she saw it. It was not hidden, exactly, but it was not displayed. A small, dark wood chest, tucked deep under the frame of the cot. It was not a large trunk. It was a small, personal box bound with black iron, and it was locked. A heavy brass padlock held it shut. Clara knelt. She was not a snooping woman, but the box called to her. It was the only thing in the cabin that was not plain, not functional. It was a box for secrets. She ran her fingers over the cold metal lock. What did a man like Eli Tanner keep locked away? Money? He did not seem to be a man who cared for it. Letters? He did not seem to be a man who had anyone to write to. She heard the sound of boots on the packed snow outside the door. She stood up too fast, her heart giving a guilty jump. The door opened, and Eli came in. He brought the cold with him. He was not carrying any game. His traps were empty. He saw her. He saw the cot. He saw the direction of her gaze. He stopped. The air in the cabin, which had been bright and cold, suddenly became thick and heavy. He looked at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of the man who had let her touch his face. They were the flat, assessing eyes of the man she had met on the trail. "I was just tidying," she said. The lie was thin in her mouth. He did not accuse her. He just walked past her. He knelt by the cot. From a string around his neck, tucked inside his shirt, he pulled a small, dark key. Clara held her breath. She expected him to move the chest, to hide it again, to warn her off. He did not. He put the key in the lock. The click of the tumblers turning was the loudest sound she had ever heard. He lifted the heavy lid. He looked at her, his face grim. "You are fire," he had said, "and I burn too easy." Now he looked like a man about to put his hand to the stove, knowing it would sear him. "You look," he said. His voice was a rasp. He stood up and walked away, turning his back to her, and stared into the fire. It was not a permission. It was a test, or perhaps a surrender. Clara moved slowly. She knelt where he had been. She looked into the box. It smelled of old leather, gun oil, and something else, something sad. The first thing she saw was the gun. Another revolver, a fine one, with a pearl handle, resting in a worn, oiled holster. Beside it, a stack of cartridges, far more than he kept on the shelf. This was his past. Under the gun were papers. She lifted them. They were old, browned at the edges. They were wanted posters. Her blood ran cold. She saw the name. Not Eli Tanner. It was Elias Tanner, and another name, Samuel Tanner. $200 reward. Wanted for armed robbery and the murder of... She dropped the poster as if it had burned her. At the bottom of the chest, there was only one thing left. It was a man's kerchief. It was blue homespun, like a farmer would wear. It was folded into a neat square, but it was not clean. It was stained, dark, stiff, rust-colored stains. Blood, old blood. Clara looked at the back of the man standing by the fire. His shoulders were rigid. He was waiting. "Elias," she said, testing the name. "That is what my mother called me." He said. He did not turn. "These posters, they are old. The law has a long memory, but not that long." "And the kerchief?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. "It was my brother's," he said. "Sam." He turned then. His face was a mask, carved from wood, but his eyes were hollow. "I told you I rode with a hard crew," he said. "The Whitlow Ranch, but that was in Texas. We were young and full of whiskey and spite. We thought we were kings." He walked to the table. He leaned on it, his scarred hands flat on the wood. "There was a feud over water. The man we worked for said a rancher, name of Gideon, was stealing it. He sent us to send a message. My brother. Sam, he was not like me. He was soft. He was a follower. He was just 17. Eli's voice was flat, like he was reading a list of supplies, but his knuckles were white. "We went to Gideon's place. It was not supposed to be a killing, just a warning. Burn a shed, run off his horses. But Gideon came out. He had a rifle. He called me a name, and I had a temper then. I had a fire in me. Too, a black one. I did not think. I just drew. I shot him. Right on his porch." Clara put a hand to her mouth. "He was dead when he hit the floor." Eli went on, his voice dead. His wife screamed. Sam just looked at me. He had not ever seen a man die up close. He was sick. We rode. The posters. Gideon's family had money. They had pull. They put a price on our heads. We ran. We rode for 2 days, north toward Indian Territory. We thought we had lost them, but a posse found us at the Cimarron River. They were not lawmen. They were bounty men. They wanted the money. He stopped. He closed his eyes. They opened fire from the rocks. Sam's horse went down. He was not a gunman. Clara, he was a boy. He got tangled. I tried to go back for him. I was firing, trying to keep their heads down. But one of them, he got a clear shot. Hit Sam in the chest. Eli's breath hitched. It was a raw, broken sound. I got him. I got him on my horse. We rode into the river, the bullets hitting the water all around us. We got to the other side, in the cottonwoods. But it was bad. It was bad. He picked up the poker and jabbed at the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. He died in my arms. He was trying to say something, but he was choking. He bled all over me. He pointed a shaking finger at the open chest. That was his. I tried to stop the bleeding with it, but you cannot stop a hole that big. He died, and I buried him with my bare hands under a tree. He threw the poker down. It clattered on the stones. I rode on. I killed one of the men who chased us. I meant to kill them all, but I just kept riding. I changed my name. I came here, to the coldest, highest place I could find. A place where nothing grows easy. A place to just be. I have not seen a town in 6 months. I have not spoken to a soul in longer. Until you. He looked at her. I have not forgiven myself. I never will. I did not just kill Gideon. I killed my brother, as sure as if I pulled the trigger on him myself. His blood is on my hands. It does not wash off. The cabin was silent. Clara was trembling. The nightmare of Amos choking on blood. It flooded back to her. She had stood at the top of the stairs. He had been at the bottom. Eli had shown her the blackness in his soul, the murder, the guilt. He had laid it all at her feet, next to the open box. She owed him her own. My husband, she said, her voice a reedy thing. Amos, he did not just fall. He did not just die. Eli watched her. He did not move. You said you were mean, she whispered, pulling her thin shawl around her. Amos, he was mean, too. He was a different kind of mean. Not with guns, with his hands, with his words. When he was sober, he was just quiet and sour. But when he was drunk, she did not need to say the words. Eli looked at her small frame, at the old, faded bruise-like shadow under her eye that never seemed to fully disappear. He understood. For 5 years, she said, staring at the floor. He had a heavy hand. I learned to be quiet. I learned to make myself small. I learned to patch up my own cuts. The town, they all knew. They saw me in the mercantile. They saw me at church before I stopped going. They saw, and they said nothing. They said a wife's duty is to bear it. That night, the last night, he had been in town, at the saloon. He lost at cards. He came home. He was worse than I had ever seen him. He was blaming me. For the cards, for the wagon, for the dry well. He said I was a curse. She was shaking hard now, living it again. He grabbed me. He tore my dress. He said he was going to teach me a lesson I would not forget. He was dragging me toward the stairs. I did not think. I just reacted. I had a cleaning rag in my hand. I pushed him away from me. She looked up at Eli, her eyes wide with the horror of the memory. He was drunk. His feet were clumsy. He stumbled back. He missed the step. He went over, backward, down the stairs. It was dark. I just heard sounds, a thud, and a crack, like your axle. Then it was quiet. I stood there. At the top, I did not move. I was so afraid. I thought he was pretending. I thought he was going to leap up and finish it. But he did not move. I went down. I lit a lamp. He was twisted. His neck, it was wrong. And he was making that sound. The sound from my nightmare. He was choking. I think his lung was punctured by a rib. He was drowning in his own blood. She was crying now, silent tears tracking through the soot on her face. I watched him. I did not get help. I did not try to stop the bleeding. I did not do anything. I just stood there. And God forgive me. Eli, I watched him die. The town, his cousin, Henry Whitlow, he was the one who found us. I was still sitting on the floor next to the body when he arrived the next morning. He took one look. He called me a killer. He said I pushed him. He said it was murder. And I did not deny it, because it felt like it. It felt like I had. The two of them sat in the small cabin, the open chest between them like a wound, two broken souls, weighed down by the dead. Finally, Clara whispered, her voice shattered. I did not mean to kill him. Eli looked at her for a long time. He crossed the room. He knelt in front of her. He did not touch her. He just looked into her eyes. I know, he said. Then he said the words that unlocked the last chain on her heart. I meant to. He had meant to kill Gideon. He had lived with intent. She had lived with accident. In that moment, he took her sin and measured it against his own, and he found hers wanting. She looked at his face, the scars, the grief, the man who had hidden from the world because he thought he was a monster. He looked at her, the fear, the pain, the woman who had been branded a monster by the world. She leaned forward. He did not pull away. Their lips met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was clumsy and desperate and aching. It was the kiss of two people who had forgotten how. It was the kiss of two people who were starving. It tasted of salt and wood smoke and a desperation so deep it had no bottom. He put his hand in her hair, his fingers tangling in the messy knot. She put her burned hand on his chest, feeling the heavy, solid beat of his heart under her palm. It was a collision. It was a drowning man finding air. It was a frozen woman finding a fire. He pulled her up from the stool. He kissed her again. And this time there was no clumsiness. There was only need. A terrible, hollow need, built from years of solitude and self-hatred. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing and carried her to the hearth, to the blankets they had shared, but never shared. They made love. It was slow at first, a discovery, a question, a mapping of scars. His hands, rough as bark, were surprisingly gentle on her skin. Her hands, trembling, traced the line of his jaw. And then it was fierce. It was the storm coming back. But this time, it was inside the cabin. It was all the pent-up loneliness, the grief, the anger, the years of living like ghosts. It was a fight to feel something, a fight to prove they were still alive. The fire crackled beside them. The cabin was filled with the sounds of their breathing, the smell of their skin. And for the first time in a long time, it was warm. When Clara woke, the cabin was gray with the early dawn. She was not on the hearth. She was in the cot. He must have carried her there. She was tucked under all the blankets. She was alone. A moment of pure, cold panic seized her. He was gone. He had taken his things. He had left her. The night it had been too much. She had pushed him too far. She sat bolt upright, clutching the blanket to her chest. The cabin door opened. Eli stood there. His duster was on. His hat was in his hand. He was just watching her. He had not been running. He had been waiting for her to wake. She did not know what to say. Good morning felt stupid. Thank you felt wrong. He walked over to the cot. He did not smile. His face was still his face, but the hollowness in his eyes was gone. They were quiet. He held out his hand. He had been outside, in the snow. On his open, scarred palm lay a single wild rose. It was not a pretty thing. It was a tough, scrubby mountain rose, a pale pink color. Its stem was covered in vicious thorns. He must have known the bush, kept it clear of snow. He had snapped it off. He laid it on the blanket that covered her, on the space that would have been her pillow, if she had one. A flower, in the middle of a frozen wasteland, a thing of beauty that knew how to survive. Clara picked it up. She pricked her finger on a thorn, and a tiny bead of bright red blood welled up. She looked at him, and for the first time, she smiled. A real small, watery smile. He did not smile back, but he nodded. Once. The peace settled. It was a new peace. A fragile one, but real. They ate breakfast. He made coffee, real coffee, from a bean he must have been saving. They drank it. They talked. Not about the past, about the weather, about the mules, about the thaw that would be coming. It was sweet. It was tense. It felt like a future. And then, that afternoon, the peace was shattered. It was Eli who heard it first. His head snapped up. He was at the door in a second, his rifle in his hand. "What is it?" Clara whispered. "A horse," he said. "One rider, coming slow." They waited. Clara's heart, which had felt so light, turned to a cold stone in her belly. The rider appeared. He stopped 20 yards from the cabin, just at the edge of the trees. He was a broad man, with a buffalo coat and a rifle in his saddle scabbard. He was not the law. He was a ranch hand. He had the arrogant, lazy look of a hired gun. He saw Eli, standing in the doorway with the rifle. He saw Clara, standing behind him. The man's eyes widened, and then a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Well, well," the man called out, his voice carrying easy in the still, cold air. "Look what we found." He spat a wad of tobacco into the snow. "Mrs. Hale, you have been a worry. Mr. Henry Whitlow has been mighty concerned for your welfare." "I am fine," Clara said, her voice shaking. "You can go." "Oh, I cannot do that," the man said, leaning on his saddle horn. "Mr. Whitlow, he is your family. Now that Amos is gone, he wants you back in town. He is your protector." "I do not need his protection," Clara said. "That is where you are wrong." The man's voice hardened. "He has got a responsibility to his cousin's memory, and he does not like complications." The man's eyes slid to Eli. "And you, Tanner, we know who you are, hiding up here. Whitlow does not like a killer hiding on his range." Eli stepped forward, out of the doorway. He did not raise the rifle. He just held it, cradled in his arm. "This is not his range," Eli said. His voice was the voice from the first night, cold, flat, deadly. The ranch hand looked at Eli. He looked at the rifle. He looked at the way Eli stood, planted, calm, and ready. The man's smile faded. He was a bully, but he was not a fool. He was paid to intimidate a woman, not to fight a man who looked like that. "You are making a mistake, Tanner," the man said, pulling his horse's head around. "You are trespassing," Eli said. "Leave." The man stared at him for a long, hateful moment. "This is not over. Whitlow's got papers, and he has got guns. He will be back, for her." He kicked his horse, spraying snow, and disappeared back into the pines. The moment he was gone, Clara began to panic. The cabin, which had been a shelter, felt like a trap. "He will be back," she said, wringing her hands. "He will bring the sheriff. He will bring Whitlow. They will say I am a murderer. They will see your posters. They will hang you. They will hang you for helping me. Oh, God, Eli." She began to gather her few things, her coat, her ruined gloves. "I have to go," she said, frantic. I cannot be the reason they hang you. I will go down the mountain. I will go west. I will disappear." She was at the door. Eli stepped in front of her. He put his hands on her shoulders. "Clara." "Let me go," she sobbed. "I cannot. You do not deserve this. I am poison." "Clara," he said again, his voice firm. He shook her, gently. "Stop." She looked up at him, her face wet with tears. "You think I care about Whitlow?" he said. "You think I care about his papers? I've been hiding from ghosts for 10 years. I am tired of running." "But they will kill you," she whispered. He looked at her. His gaze was so intense it pinned her. "Before you," he said, his voice raw. "No one had ever looked at me. Not the real me. They looked at the rumors. They looked at the gunman. They looked at the ghost. My own brother, he looked at me like I was a monster, even before he died. But you—" He touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. "You are the first person who has ever seen me, the real me, and you did not run." He shook his head. "I am not letting them take you." Clara stared at him. He was not just offering protection. He was offering himself. He was choosing her over his safety, over his solitude, over his penance. "What do we do?" she asked. He did not answer for a moment. He walked over to her, to where her small canvas bag sat. He reached inside. Clara watched, confused. His hand emerged. He was holding her wedding ring, the thin gold band she had not been able to bring herself to throw away. It was the last shackle. He walked to the small, cast-iron stove. He opened the heavy metal door. The fire inside was burning hot. He looked at her. He held out his hand, the ring sitting in his palm. Clara understood. This was the choice. The past or him. The town or the mountain. The lie or the truth. She put her hand on his. Her fingers closed over the ring. It was cold. Together, they moved their hands over the open stove. Clara opened her fingers. The ring fell. It did not make a sound. It just landed in the glowing red heart of the coals. They watched as the gold began to darken, to lose its shape, to slump, and then to melt. They watched it burn until it was nothing. Just a memory. Just ash. "Now," Eli said, closing the stove door. "We get ready." She stayed. It was a new thing. This peace. It did not sit easy on either of them. After the ring melted, after the ranch hand had disappeared back down the trail, the cabin became a different place. It was not a shelter anymore. It was a home, a temporary one, a fragile one, but it was theirs. The days that followed were sweet. It was a sweetness made sharp by the tension, like eating wild berries when you know a bear is nearby. The threat of Henry Whitlow was a shadow on the wall, a cold draft under the door. But in the center of the room, by the fire, they found something that was almost normal. They found they could laugh. It was a rusty sound in both of them. It happened when Eli, trying to prove he could be useful for something other than guns, tried to flip a flapjack in the pan. He missed. The half-cooked thing of flour and water landed in the wood ash. Clara had watched, her hand over her mouth. He looked at the ruined flapjack, then at her, his face grim. "The mules will eat it," he muttered. And Clara laughed. It was not a giggle. It was a real, deep laugh that shook her shoulders. It was the first time she had laughed, truly laughed, since before Amos had turned sour. The sound surprised her. It surprised him more. He stared at her, and the hard lines around his mouth softened. A slow, small smile touched one side of his face. He had not smiled. Not ever. It changed everything about him. "It is not that funny," he said. "It is," she said, wiping a tear from her eye. "It truly is." They found other things. He had an old almanac, its pages yellowed and soft as cotton. It was his only book. Some nights, by the fire, she would read it to him. She had a good, clear voice. She read about the phases of the moon, and the best time to plant potatoes, and predictions for a mild winter next year. Reading about planting potatoes felt like an act of defiance. It felt like believing in a next year. One afternoon, she was trying to comb the tangles out of her hair with her fingers. It was a mess, matted with sweat and smoke. "That looks broke," he said, gesturing to her hair. "It is," she said. "I do not have a comb." He said nothing, but went to the lean-to. He came back with the curry comb he used on his Appaloosa. He had washed it. "Sit," he said. She sat on the stool by the fire. "You are not." "Sit." She sat. He stood behind her. He took her hair in one of his big scarred hands. He was clumsy. He pulled. "Ow," she said. "Be still." He began to comb, gently. He worked the tangles out, one by one, his movements slow and patient. He was as careful with her hair as he was with the trigger of his rifle. When he was done, he did not stop. He went to the stove, heated water. He took the lye soap. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice small. "It is still dirty." He had her lean over a bucket, and Eli Tanner, the gunman, the killer, the recluse, washed her hair. His fingers, which knew how to end a life, worked the soap into her scalp. His touch was rough, but it was not unkind. It was careful. Clara closed her eyes and let herself be tended to. It was a new feeling. It was a terrible, wonderful, dangerous feeling. But the storm was still brewing. The shadow under the door was growing. It was 4 days after the first rider. Eli was outside, splitting the last of the wood he had cut before the blizzard. Clara was sweeping the floor. She heard him. Not a shout, just one sharp word. "Inside." She did not ask why. She dropped the broom and ran to the window, pulling the heavy curtain aside just an inch. He was already at the edge of the trees, his rifle in his hand, kneeling behind a granite boulder. Then she saw them. They were in the valley below, maybe a half-mile distant. 4 riders. The snow made them clear, dark figures against the white. "It is them," she whispered, her heart turning to ice. "I see them." His voice was calm, carried on the cold. Still air. Is it Whitlow?" "I see a badge," he said. "The one in the front. He is a lawman. And another one, a big man. That must be Whitlow." Clara watched, her stomach churning. The riders were not coming up the trail. They were casting back and forth, like hounds who had lost a scent. The ranch hand, the one who had come before, was with them, pointing. They did not know where the cabin was. The snow had covered Eli's trail. The cabin was tucked so deep into the rock, you could not see it from below. But they were close. Clara watched the sheriff. He was a solid man. He sat his horse well. He looked tired. Whitlow, beside him, was agitated. He was pointing up the slope, toward the cabin, his arms stabbing the air. He was arguing. The sheriff shook his head. He seemed to be pointing at the sun, which was getting low. He was pointing back toward town. Whitlow was furious. He wheeled his horse, then looked up the mountain one last time. Clara felt his gaze. Even from a half-mile away, it was full of hate. Then they turned. The 4 riders started back down the valley, toward town. Clara let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She sank onto the stool, her legs weak. Eli did not come in for a long time. When he did, his face was grim. The man who had washed her hair was gone. The killer was back. "They will be back," he said, "tomorrow, or the day after. They will not stop." He began to prepare for war. He did not just clean his guns. He took the heavy table and barred the door with it. He took the iron shovel head and wedged it against the window shutter, turning the small cabin into a dark box. He brought his rifle, both pistols, and all his boxes of cartridges, and laid them out on the cot. He was building a fort, but Clara knew it was not a fort. It was a tomb. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "They want to fight," he said, his voice flat as he loaded the pistols. "I will give them one." "Eli, that was the law. That was a sheriff. You cannot shoot a sheriff." "He is with Whitlow," Eli said. "He is bought. It does not matter. They mean to take you, or kill me. I will not let them take you." "And then what?" she cried, standing up. "You kill them? You kill a lawman, and Whitlow. And then what? We spend the rest of our lives running from every posse in the territory? Is that the life you are offering me?" He stopped loading. He looked at her, his eyes dark. "I am offering you life. I am keeping you alive." "No!" she shouted, and she crossed the room and swept her arm across the cot, scattering the neat rows of bullets. They rolled across the floor like copper teeth. "This is not life. This is your past. This is what you know. Blood, and guns, and killing. You are just falling back into the hole you have been in for 10 years. He stared at the scattered bullets, then at her. His face was thunderous. "What else is there? They're coming with guns!" "I do not want your protection," she said, and her voice broke. "Do you understand me? I do not want to be protected. I was protected by Amos. I was his property. I do not want to be your property, something you fight for." She put her hands on his chest. It was like touching stone. "Eli, I am haunted by blood. Too, I watched my husband die. I do not want to watch you die, and I do not want to watch you kill. It will break you. It will break us." He looked down at her, his breathing heavy. He was lost. He was a man built for war, and she was asking him to farm. "I want a future," she whispered, her eyes pleading with his. "I do not care if it is in a fine house or a sod hut. I do not care if we are poor. I want to read that almanac and mean it. I want to plant those potatoes. I want a future, not a gunfight." His shoulders slumped, the readiness, the killing energy, drained out of him. He looked old. He looked like the man who had confessed about his brother. "Then what?" he whispered. "Clara, what do we do? They will be back." "We run," she said. "Run where? They have the valley." "The pass," she said, pointing not east, toward town, but west, toward the high, jagged peaks behind the cabin. "The pass. You said the storm closed it. But the thaw, the snow is melting. It is dangerous, but it is a way out." He looked past her, toward the west wall. He thought she could see the calculations in his eyes. He was mapping the terrain, the danger. "It will be hard," he said. "The snow will be deep, avalanches." "But they will not follow," she said. "They will not expect it. We can go west, across the pass, to Montana, to Oregon, to some place where no one knows the name Hale or Tanner." He looked at her. He saw the fire in her, not the recklessness, the hope. "We will need food," he said. "The mules will need feed. It will take 2 days to pack, to prepare." "Then we prepare," she said. "We do not fight. We run." He put his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes. "West," he said, as if it were a prayer. "West." That night, the cabin was not a fortress. It was a stopping point. It was the last night. They put the cabin back as it was. They made their plan. They would leave before dawn, on the second day. Give the thaw 1 more day to settle the pass. The tension was still there, but it was a different kind. It was the tension of a rope pulled tight, about to be sprung. They lay down on the hearth for the last time, but they did not sleep in their separate blankets. He reached for her. She went to him. They made love. It was not the desperate, crashing need of the first time. It was not the angry, possessive act of a gunman. It was slow, it was quiet, it was a goodbye. It was a way of memorizing. He ran his hand down the curve of her back, as if he were trying to learn the shape of her, to carve it into his palm. He kissed the old, faded bruise on her shoulder. He held her face in his hands and just looked at her. She traced the long, pale scar above his collarbone, the one she had seen the first night. She touched the scars on his knuckles. She kissed the place on his jaw she had touched that morning, the place that had started all of this. She was accepting him, the scars, the past, the man. They held each other in the firelight, listening to the drip, drip, drip of the snow melting from the roof. It was the sound of their escape. Before dawn, it was cold. The fire was banked to embers. They moved in the dark, whispering. "The flower," she said. "Packed," he replied. The cartridges. Half for me, half for you, in your bag. He had given her the smaller pistol. He had spent an hour the day before, teaching her how to load it, how to aim, how to fire. She was a good shot. It did not surprise him. They packed the mules. Jed and Sal. They were strong. They had rested. They could make the pass. They stood in the open doorway. The air was sharp, biting. The stars were brilliant, like chips of ice. The moon was a sliver, casting a weak blue light on the snow. "It is time," he said. He stepped out, his rifle in his hand. He scanned the trees. Clara took her bag, blew out the lantern. He put a hand out, stopping her. "What?" she whispered. "Wait." He stood, frozen. He was not looking, he was listening. The world was silent. The dripping had stopped. The night freeze had set in. There was no wind. "Eli," she said, impatient, "we must go." "No," he whispered. "Something is wrong." "I do not hear anything." "That is what is wrong," he said. "The owls, the night birds, they are quiet. Something quieted them." And then he saw it. A flicker, a movement in the dark trees, 100 yards down, where the trail from the valley met his own. A shadow detaching itself from other shadows. "Get back inside," he hissed. "What?" "Now, Clara!" He shoved her back through the door. At the same time, a voice boomed out across the snow, sharp and cold. "Do not move, Tanner!" It was Henry Whitlow. "We have you surrounded. Give up the woman, and the sheriff might let you live." Clara looked out the doorway. In the pale, pre-dawn light, she could see them. Not 4, a dozen, men in the trees, crouched, rifles raised. They had come in the night. They had waited. They were trapped. Eli pulled her away from the door. "Get to the back wall. Stay down." "Eli, no," she begged, grabbing his arm. "Do not fight. We can talk. The sheriff." "The sheriff is not in charge," Eli said, his voice flat. This is not an arrest. This is a lynching." "Then we surrender." "He will not let you surrender," Eli said. "He will say I resisted. He will shoot me, and then he will take you, and God knows what he will do to you for killing his cousin." "Eli, please," she sobbed, holding his duster. "You promised. No more killing. You promised me a future." He looked at her. His face was the face of the killer, but his eyes were the man who had washed her hair. He was caught. He was trapped by them, by her. He put his hand on her head. He pushed her hair back. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was a kiss that was both a blessing and a curse. "I will try not to," he said. And then he kicked the door shut, grabbed his rifle, and dove for the window. The first shot was not his. A bullet ripped through the heavy wooden door, splintering it. "Fire!" Whitlow screamed. The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 sides. Bullets tore through the small cabin. Wood splintered. The tin cups on the shelf danced and fell. The mirror he had used for shaving shattered. Eli was at the side window, the one that faced the slope. He fired. Crack! A man screamed in the trees. Crack! He fired again. He was not shooting to kill. He was shooting at their cover, forcing their heads down. "Clara, the back wall!" he yelled. Clara was huddled near the hearth, crying. "Eli!" "I am fine," he yelled. "Stay down." The gunfight was brutal. It was not a fair fight. It was a dozen men against one, but the one was Eli Tanner, and he was on his own ground. The snow outside exploded in puffs of white as bullets missed. The trees barked as rifles hit them. Blood stained the snow. A man staggered out from behind a pine, clutching his shoulder. Eli was a ghost. He fired from the window, then rolled to the door, fired 2 shots through the wood, then was back at a knothole in the back wall. He was everywhere. Clara watched, horrified. This was the man from the posters. This was Elias Tanner. He was death. He was a storm. But he was her Eli.
"Whitlow!"
Eli roared, his voice cutting through the gunfire.
"Call them off! You do not want this!" "Kill him!"
Whitlow screamed, his voice thick with hate.
"He is a murderer! Kill him!"
A bullet punched through the wall where Eli had just been.
"He is on the left!"
a man shouted. Eli moved to the window. He saw a man leveling a rifle, not at the cabin, but at the lean-to, at the mules. "No," Eli whispered. He sighted. He fired. The man dropped. Eli put his back to the wall, reloading. His breath was ragged. He was not just fighting. He was protecting their escape. He saw a new shadow, a man crawling through the snow, getting close to the cabin, a pistol in his hand. Eli burst through the door, firing from the hip. The man rolled, firing back. A bullet screamed. Eli grunted, a sharp, terrible sound. He staggered back, clutching his leg. "Eli!" Clara screamed, and she ran to him.
"Stay down!"
he yelled, pushing her, but he was hurt. A dark stain was spreading on his thigh. He fell to one knee, but he kept the rifle up. Outside, the man he had shot at was wounded. The firing slowed. And then Henry Whitlow stepped out from behind the largest pine. He was a big man, in a fine coat. He held a shotgun. He was not a gunman. He was a bully, and his men were down.
"It is over, Tanner,"
Whitlow said, walking slowly toward the cabin. Eli, kneeling in the doorway, bleeding, raised his rifle. He centered it on Whitlow's chest. "One more step," Eli grated, "and you are a dead man." Whitlow froze. He saw the look in Eli's eyes. He saw the truth. You shot my men," Whitlow stammered. "They will live," Eli said, "but you will not. You are an outlaw. And you are a coward," Eli spat. It was a standoff, a bleeding man with a rifle, a healthy man with a shotgun, and 100 yards of snow between them.
"Drop it, Whitlow!"
A new voice, a fourth voice. "The sheriff." He stepped out from the trees, his pistol drawn, but it was not pointed at Eli. It was pointed at Henry Whitlow.
"Sheriff?"
Whitlow said, confused.
"What are you doing? Arrest him!"
I said, "Drop the shotgun," the sheriff said. His name was Brody. He was an old man, and he looked tired. "I've had enough of this. I came here to serve a warrant for questioning, not to watch a massacre."
"He is a murderer!"
Whitlow shrieked.
"He has got wanted posters on him. From Texas! He killed Gideon!"
"I saw those posters," Brody said, walking into the clearing. "They are 10 years old. Whitlow, the statute is passed. He is not wanted for that anymore."
"But her,"
Whitlow said, turning his rage on Clara, who was now standing in the doorway, holding Eli up. "She killed my cousin. She murdered Amos." "Eli," Clara whispered, "hold on." She let go of him, letting him lean against the doorframe, and she walked out into the snow. She walked past Eli, toward the sheriff. She did not look at Whitlow. She looked at Sheriff Brody. "Sheriff," she said, her voice clear and strong. It did not shake. "My name is Clara Hale. My husband, Amos Hale, was your cousin's cousin. And he beat me. He beat me for 5 years. The town watched, and they did nothing." Whitlow sputtered.
"Lies! She is a—"
"Be quiet, Henry," the sheriff said. He did not take his eyes off Clara. "That night," Clara continued, "he came home drunk. He was going to hurt me. Worse than before. I pushed him. He was at the top of the stairs. I pushed him, and he fell. He broke his neck, and he died. And I sat there, and I watched him. I did not get help. I did not cry. I was glad. I was glad he was dead." The clearing was dead silent. The wounded men were groaning in the trees. "That is my confession," Clara said. "If that is murder, then arrest me. But you will not take him." She pointed at Eli. "He did not do this. He gave me shelter." Sheriff Brody looked at Clara. He looked at her small, defiant face. He looked at the hate on Henry Whitlow's face. He looked at Eli, bleeding in the doorway, his rifle still pointed at the ground, but ready. Brody made his decision. "Henry," the sheriff said, "your cousin's death was ruled an accident by the coroner. There is no warrant for Mrs. Hale." But she confessed." "I heard what she said," Brody said. "It sounds like self-defense to me, and I reckon any jury in this territory would see it the same way, especially after hearing what you tried to pull here today."
You cannot."
"I am the law here, Henry," Brody said, "and I say this is done." He looked at Clara. "You are free to go, ma'am. The town will not bother you." Then he looked at Eli. His face hardened. "You," he said. "Tanner, the statute on that old Texas warrant may be passed, but I cannot have a man like you on my mountain. You are too good with that." He nodded at the rifle. "You attract trouble, and you answer it too quick. This shooting today I'm ruling it self-defense, but this is your one and only warning." He holstered his pistol. "You have 24 hours to be out of Wyoming. I catch you in this territory after sunrise tomorrow. I will arrest you myself, and I will find something to make it stick." He turned. "Henry, get your wounded men. Get off this mountain, and do not let me see you with that shotgun again." Whitlow was purple with rage. He was defeated. He stared at Clara, his eyes promising a hell he could not deliver. He said nothing. He threw his shotgun into the snow and stalked off to find his men. Clara ran back to Eli. He was pale. The snow around his boot was red. "You are hurt," she whispered. "It is just a leg," he said, letting the rifle fall. He leaned on her. "Let's go," she said. "Where?" he whispered, his strength failing. "West," Clara Hale said, holding him up. "We are going west." They did not look back. Clara tore a strip from her spare dress and bound Eli's leg. Tight, the bullet had gone clean through the thick muscle of his thigh. It was a terrible, bleeding wound. But it had missed the bone. He was lucky, if you could call any of it lucky. He gritted his teeth, his face the color of ash. "I can ride," he said. "You will not have to," she said. "Not far." They loaded the mules, Jed and Sal, with the supplies they had packed. They left the cabin door open, the floor littered with brass casings and shattered glass. They left the ghosts and the blood. Eli put his Appaloosa in the lean-to. "He will be fine," Eli said, his voice strained. "Brody's men will find him when they come back for the wounded." He put his hand on the horse's neck. It was a goodbye. Then he looked at Clara. "The pass. It is now, or never." He was half limping, half carrying his own weight on Clara's shoulder. She, in turn, was half carrying him. They were a broken, lurching unit. They led the mules up the slope behind the cabin, up toward the high, jagged peaks that scraped the belly of the sky. The going was hell. It was thawing spring, which was not a gentle season in the high country. It was a time of treachery. The snow, which had been a dry powder, was now a wet, heavy sludge that tried to pull the boots off their feet. It was knee-deep. Sometimes they broke through the crust and sank to their hips. Eli moved with a grim, animal-like determination. Every step sent a jolt of pure fire up his leg. He did not groan. He did not complain. He just breathed, a harsh, ragged sound in the thin, cold air. Clara could feel the heat of his fever through his duster. She was the strong one. She took the lead, breaking the trail, her small body pushing against the weight of the mountain. She held his hand, pulling him. "Just to the ridge," she would say, pointing to a stand of wind-blasted pines 100 yards above. When they got there, he would collapse onto a rock, his head hanging, his body shaking. She would give him water. She would check his leg. The bandage was soaked through with blood. She repacked it.
"I am slowing you,"
he grated, His eyes closed.
Leave me! Take the mules! Go!
Clara slapped him. It was not a hard slap, but it was sharp. It cracked in the stillness of the mountain. His eyes snapped open. He stared at her, shocked.
Do not you ever,
she said, her voice low and shaking with fury.
ever say that to me. We are not leaving pieces behind. We are going. He
looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen in the cabin. But it was not for him. It was with him. He nodded. All right, Clara. They climbed. They climbed for 2 days. They slept one night huddled between the mules for warmth, under a granite overhang, sharing a single cold biscuit. The world was a blinding, aching white. They were 2 small, dark specks crawling toward the sky. On the 3rd day, they reached the summit of the pass. The wind was a solid, screaming thing, trying to peel them from the rock, but below them, on the other side, it was Montana. A vast, wide valley, green with new pine and aspen, stretched out before them. A river, the color of silver, snaked through it. The snow was thinner here. It was a new world. It was a promised land. They did not cheer. They just stood, holding on to each other, and breathed. The journey down was almost as bad. Eli's fever worsened. By the time they reached the valley floor, he was delirious. He was mumbling. He was talking to his brother, Sam, apologizing. Clara got him on Jed, the mule. She walked beside him, holding him in the saddle. She walked for another day, following the river, until she saw smoke. It was not a town. It was a settlement. A dozen rough-hewn cabins and a single, false-fronted building that called itself the Riverbend Mercantile. It was on the Montana border, a place for trappers, prospectors, and people who did not want to be found. It was perfect. She found a shack. It was half dugout, built into the riverbank, abandoned by some hopeful miner. The roof was sod. The door was hide. It was damp and smelled of mud. She dragged Eli inside. She made a bed of pine boughs. She sold her Spencer rifle, her last 5 cartridges, and her husband's shaving razor to the mercantile owner for a sack of beans, a slab of bacon, and a bottle of laudanum. For a week, she did not sleep. She nursed him. She boiled river water. She cleaned his wound, which was angry and red. She forced broth and laudanum down his throat. She sat by him in the dark, listening to him rave, holding his hand, telling him, "Hush, Eli, it is all right. I am here. You are safe." On the 8th day, his fever broke. He woke up. He was thin, his face a skull with skin stretched over it. But his eyes were clear. He looked around the small, dark, mud-walled shack. He saw the empty bean sack. He saw her asleep on the dirt floor, her hand on his chest. "Clara," he whispered. She woke instantly. "You are back," she said. "We made it," he said. "We made it." They started over. It was a life built from nothing, from less than nothing. They had no money. They had 2 mules. They had each other. The town, Riverbend, treated them kindly at first. That is the way of the frontier. A new face is a new hand. Someone to help build, someone to share the burden of the wilderness. The women at the mercantile, Mrs. Davies, the owner's wife, a large woman with a kind face, nodded to Clara. She offered advice on how to stop the roof from leaking. "You need more clay in that sod, dearie." Clara was polite. She was quiet. She was grateful. Eli, as his leg healed, began to work. He was strong. He could chop wood, clear land, and fix an axle better than any man in the settlement. He took a job at a small ranch just outside the settlement, run by a man named Peterson. Eli did not talk much, but he worked. He worked from sunup to sundown. He was earning their keep. He was building their future. Clara planted potatoes. She used the almanac, the one they had saved, the only book they owned. She planted in the small patch of mud behind their shack. She helped Mrs. Davies unpack crates at the mercantile. For a month, it was quiet. For a month, they were just Mr. and Mrs. Tanner. They were not outlaws. They were not murderers. They were just settlers. And then the whispers came. A freight wagon came through from Lander. The driver, a talkative man named Silas, stopped at the mercantile. He saw Clara. He recognized her. He told the story. He told them about the widow, Clara Hale, the one who had pushed her husband down the stairs, the one who had shacked up with a gunman, a killer named Tanner, the one who had been in a shootout with Henry Whitlow's men. The story was dark, it was salacious, and it was good. The next time Clara went to the mercantile, the air was different. Mrs. Davies was not unkind, but she was busy. She did not meet Clara's eye. The other women in the store, 2 wives of local trappers, saw her. They clustered together. They stopped talking. They whispered. Clara felt the old, cold sickness in her stomach. It had followed her. Over the mountains, across the border, the whispers had found her. She bought her flour and salt, her face burning. She left. She did not tell Eli. He was working so hard. He was happy. It was a quiet, brittle happiness, but it was real. He would come home, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, and he would sit by their small fire, and he would watch her cook, and the hollow look in his eyes was gone. She would not bring it back. She would bear this. But it got worse. One night, she went to the store just before closing. She needed thread. She had been mending Eli's shirt, the same one she had mended in the cabin. It was threadbare, but it was all he had. She walked in. Mrs. Davies was there, and the 2 trappers' wives, Mary and Sarah. "Good evening, Mrs. Davies," Clara said. Mrs. Davies looked up, her face tight. "Clara, I just need a spool of black thread." "We are just closing," Mrs. Davies said, not moving. "It will only take a moment." One of the women, Sarah, a thin, sharp-faced woman, stepped forward. "We do not want your kind in here." Clara froze. "My kind?" "We are decent folk here," Sarah said, her voice rising, high and pious. "We do not hold with women who kill their men, and we surely do not hold with women who run off with outlaws." "That is not you do not know the story," Clara stammered. "We know enough." The other woman, Mary, said, "We know you are bad luck, and we do not want it." "Mrs. Davies?" Clara looked at the older woman, pleading. "Mrs." Davies looked at the floor. "I'm sorry, Clara, but people are talking. It is bad for business. Perhaps your husband should come." "Your husband, not you." Clara stood there. The 3 women looked at her, not with hate, with fear, the fear of a decent thing for a tainted one. The shame was so profound, so sudden. It was like a physical blow. It was Lander all over again. The church door, locked, the whispers in the street. She turned. She did not say a word. She walked out of the store. She made it back to the shack. She closed the high door, and she broke. She slid down the mud wall, and she wept. She had not cried when Amos died. She had not cried in the blizzard. She had not cried when the bullets were flying. But she cried now. She cried for the injustice of it, for the fact that the truth did not matter. Only the story mattered. She was still crying when Eli came home. He found her huddled in the dark, her body shaking with sobs. He did not speak. He did not ask what was wrong. He just dropped his hat. He went to her. He knelt in the dirt, and he pulled her into his arms. He held her. He let her cry. He held her tight, as if he could absorb the pain into himself. She told him. The words came out in a broken, hiccuping rush. The store, the women. Bad luck. Killed her man. He listened. His face, in the dim light from the fire, grew very still. The killer came back into his eyes. "I will go see them," he said, his voice a low growl. "No,"
she said, clutching his shirt. No, that is what they expect. That is the outlaw. Do not become that again, please, Eli. He looked at her, his jaw tight. He was a man of action, and she had taken his guns away. He did not know what to do. He held her all night. They did not sleep. The next day, he did not go to the ranch. He did not say anything. He just took his axe, and he went into the cottonwood grove by the river. Clara watched him from the shack. She heard it all day, the steady, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of his axe. He was chopping. He was working. He came back at dusk, dragging 3 smooth, straight cottonwood logs. He did not eat. He lit the lantern. He took his knife, the one he was always sharpening, and he began to work. He worked for 2 days. He did not sleep. He carved. He planed the wood with his knife. He notched. He fitted. On the 3rd night, he was finished. Clara woke. He was standing in the middle of the small, one-room shack. In the center of the room, where there had been nothing but a dirt floor, was a table. It was a beautiful thing. It was made of pale, smooth cottonwood. The legs were thick and steady. The top was planed so flat and smooth. It felt like silk under her hand. He had built it without a single nail, fitting the pieces together like a puzzle. It was solid. It was real. It was the most beautiful piece of furniture she had in her life. She stood up. She walked over to it. She put her hands on it. "Eli," she whispered. He was standing by the fire, exhausted, his hands raw. "They do not know you," he said. His voice was rough. "They do not know what you survived. They do not know what you are. They just know a story." He walked over to her. He stood on the other side of the table. It was the first thing they had ever owned. Together. "But I know," he said. "I was there. I know you. And that is all that matters." He had not fought for her. He had built for her. He had taken her pain and his anger, and he had made a thing of use, a thing of peace. She walked around the table, and she kissed him. Life changed. The whispers did not stop, but they did not matter as much. Eli went back to the ranch. His boss, Peterson, a quiet man, had heard the stories. "Your wife," Peterson said to Eli. "She that widow from Wyoming?" Eli stopped loading hay. He looked at his boss. "Yes." "And you are that gunman, Tanner?" "Yes." Peterson chewed on a piece of straw. "Well, you are the best hand I have ever had. Your wife, she seems to be growing potatoes in mud. She has got a grit. I do not care what happened in Wyoming. This is Montana. Just keep the peace." "I will," Eli said. He gained trust, slowly, not with words, with work. Clara did not go back to the mercantile often, but she did not hide. She tended her potatoes. She helped Peterson's wife when their cow was birthing a calf. It was a breech birth. Clara was not afraid. She went in, shoulder deep, and she turned the calf. She saved it. People began to see her, not the story, her. They had the table. They would sit at it, at night, in their mud shack. They would eat their beans and bacon, and they would talk. They talked about things they never thought they would live to want. "I saw a dog," Eli said one night, staring into his tin cup of coffee. "At the ranch. A good one. A hound. He had pups." "A dog?" Clara smiled. "We cannot feed a dog, Eli." "I know, but it would be nice to have a dog." "Yes," she said, "it would." Another night, she touched her belly. "Mrs. Peterson, she has 3 children. They make a lot of noise." Eli looked at her. He saw the wish in her eyes. "Noise is not so bad," he said very quietly. I have had enough quiet." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. The thought of a child. His child, her child. It was a thing so fragile and so bright, he could barely look at it. But the past was not dead. It was just sleeping.
Eli still had nightmares. Clara would wake to him, thrashing on their blanket roll, his hands clenched, his voice a low, strangled moan.
Sam, Sam, I am coming, hold on.
He would wake, covered in a cold sweat, and he would not be able to breathe. He would get up. He would pull on his boots.
Eli, where are you going?
To walk, he would say, and he would go out into the dark and walk for hours. She let him go. She knew he was walking off the ghosts. But one night, he was gone for a long time. The moon was full. She got worried. She followed him. She found him by the river. He was standing in the shallows, the cold Montana water swirling around his knees. The moonlight made him look like a statue. He was not alone. He was holding it, the blood-stained blue kerchief, his brother's. He was staring at it, turning it over in his hands. He was talking to it, whispering. I am sorry. Sam, I did not mean I am sorry. Clara's heart broke. It broke for him. She did not go to him. She waited until he came back, his feet wet, his face hollowed out by the moon. The next day, she went to him. He was oiling a harness.
Eli,
she said. He kept working. Ma'am.
You have to stop, she said.
He stopped.
Stop what? Punishing yourself. He is gone. Eli, Sam is gone, but you are here.
He looked at the harness. I killed him, Clara. That is plain. She walked over to him. She took the oily rag from his hand. You do not have to forget him, she said, her voice soft but strong. You should not forget him, but you do have to forgive yourself. You have to, or you will never be here. You will always be back at that river, in the cottonwoods. He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain so old, it was almost dead. I do not know how, he whispered.
I have carried him for 10 years. He is all I have.
You have me, she said. That evening, she took his knife. He watched her. She went to the woodpile. She found a good solid piece of pine. She sat at the table, and she began to carve. She was not a natural carver, but she was patient. She worked. She carved a simple cross. When she was done, she handed it to him. We cannot bury him, she said, but we can mark him. He took the cross. He ran his scarred thumb over the wood. Together, they walked up the small hill behind their shack. They found the tallest pine, one that looked out over the river. Eli dug a hole with his bare hands. He dug until his fingers were raw. He looked at the kerchief. He had it in his pocket. He held it for a long time. He did not bury it. He could not, but he did not need to.
He planted the cross. He packed the dirt around it.
They stood there. It was not a grave. It was a memory. Goodbye, Sam. Eli said it was the first time he had said it. They walked back to the shack, the sun setting, turning the river to fire. That night, they lay on their blankets. He was quiet, but it was a new quiet. It was not a haunted quiet. It was a peaceful one. He turned to her. He pulled her close. He buried his face in her hair. He thought of her first words to him. The joke. I'll pay you in skin. He thought of how cold and afraid she had been. You are my skin now, he whispered, his voice thick. You are what I live in. The spring thaw was hard, but the summer was harder. They lived in the mud-walled shack by the river. It was not much, but it was theirs. The shadow of Wyoming was long, but Montana was a big country. Eli worked. He worked at the Peterson Ranch from before the sun was up until after it was down. He was a quiet man, but his labor spoke for him. He was strong. He was steady. He did not drink. He did not gamble. He just worked. He was saving. He was building. Clara worked, too. Her patch of potatoes in the river mud grew. She put up a small fence to keep the deer out. She learned to fish in the river, standing on the bank with a line tied to a willow branch. She was stubborn. She was a survivor. And then the knowing came. It was not a single moment. It was a sickness in the mornings, a deep, bone-weary tiredness in the afternoons. It was a change in her. She was a practical woman. She knew her own body. Eli found her one morning by the river. Sick. She had tried to hide it from him. He stood behind her. He did not ask. He did not have to. He just knew. She washed her face in the cold river water, trembling. I do not know how to be," she whispered, not looking at him. "I am not soft. I am not a mother." He knelt beside her. He looked at the water. "I am not a father," he said. His voice was thick. He was a man whose hands were stained. He was a man who had ended a line. His brothers. How could he start a new one? They were terrified. They sat at the table he had built, that solid, pale wood table, and they worried. They dreamed. They laughed. "What if he is like me?" Eli said one night, staring at his scarred hands. "What if he has that black fire in him?" "Then he will have me," Clara said, her hand resting on his. "To put it out. And what if she is like me, sharp-tongued and bitter?" "Then she will have me," Eli said, a small, slow smile touching his mouth. "To steady her, she will be fine." He tried to carve a small horse for the baby out of a piece of pine. He was good with an axe, but not with a carving knife. The thing looked, as Clara told him, like a potato that has been in a fight. And they laughed. It was a new sound in the small shack. It was a sound that built walls better than mud. The fear was always there. The fear that the past was not done with them. The fear that someone from Lander, that Whitlow, would send men. Eli still slept light. He still kept the pistol he had given Clara clean and loaded under their blankets. Then, one day, the freight wagon came through, the same one, driven by the same talkative man, Silas. Eli was at the mercantile, buying salt and a new axe handle. He was standing by the counter when Silas came in, talking to Mr. Peterson, his boss. "It is a terrible thing back in Wyoming," Silas said, spitting tobacco onto the porch. "A bad fever swept through Lander. Hit the big men worst. Took that man Henry Whitlow. Took him in 3 days. Burned him right up. They say he was raving at the end. Raving about a widow and a gunman on a mountain." Eli did not flinch. He did not move. He paid for his salt. He paid for his axe handle. He nodded to Peterson. He walked home. The sun was high. He walked into the shack. Clara was mending his shirt. She looked up. "It is over," he said. "What is?" "Whitlow, he is dead. A fever." Clara put the shirt down. She stared at him. She did not cry. She did not smile. She just let out a breath. It was a breath she had been holding for a year. It was a breath she had been holding since she stood at the top of those stairs. "So," she said, her voice small, "no one is looking for us anymore." "No one," he said. "We are just us." The town of Riverbend had heard the stories, but they had also been watching. And in a small place like that, what you see every day starts to matter more than what you heard once. They saw Eli Tanner. They saw him save his wages. They saw him help Peterson rebuild a whole line of fence after a storm, working for 2 days straight without sleep. They saw him carve the small, simple cross and plant it on the hill. A man who honors his dead, they reckoned, cannot be all bad. And they saw Clara. They saw the woman who had saved Peterson's calf. They saw the woman who had a garden growing where there was only mud. They saw a woman who was quiet, who was proud, and who was now, very clearly, carrying a child. The whispers did not stop, but they got quieter. Mrs. Davies, at the mercantile, was the first. Clara came in for flour. The other women, Sarah and Mary, were there. They went quiet, as usual. Clara paid for her flour. As she turned to leave, "Mrs." Davies said, that looks to be coming along well. Clara, you are carrying strong." Clara stopped. She looked at the older woman.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Davies.
You be careful on your feet, Mrs. Davies said. It was not much, but it was a start. The real change came in the dead of night. A month later, a pounding on their hide door. Eli was on his feet in an instant, the pistol in his hand. "Mr. Tanner!" a voice yelled, frantic.
Please!
Eli opened the door. It was the trapper, Sarah's husband. His face was pale and wet with rain.
It is my wife, he said, pleading. Sarah, the baby. It is stuck. It is coming wrong. Mrs. Davies, she does not know what to do. She said to get her.
He looked past Eli, at Clara.
Please, Mrs. Tanner. They said you saved the Peterson calf. They said you were not afraid. Please, I think she is dying.
Clara looked at Eli. His face was hard. This was the woman who had shamed her, who had cast her out. Clara just grabbed her shawl. "I will come." Eli grabbed his duster. "I am coming with you." The trapper's cabin was small and hot and full of the smell of fear and sickness. Sarah was on the bed, her face gray, screaming, "Mrs." Davies was trying to hold her hand, looking helpless. "It is breech." "Mrs." Davies whispered to Clara.
I cannot turn it."
Sarah saw Clara. Her eyes went wide with terror.
"No, not her. It is a judgment. Get her out."
Clara walked to the bed. She put her hand on Sarah's forehead.
"Be quiet, Sarah,"
she said. Her voice was not kind. It was not mean, it was just strong. "You are not dying, and this is not a judgment. This is just a baby, and it is coming wrong. Now, you hold on to your husband. This is going to hurt." She turned to Eli. "I need you to hold her. Hold her still." Eli did. He put his big scarred hands on Sarah's shoulders. He held her. Clara did what she had done for the cow. She was not afraid of the blood. She was not afraid of the pain. She was strong. She was steady. She talked to Sarah, her voice a low, firm command. "Now, you push. Now." It was a long, terrible hour. It was a fight. And then a cry, a thin, wet, angry cry. Clara stepped back, holding a small, bloody, perfect baby boy. She cleaned him. She wrapped him in a blanket. She laid him on his mother's chest. Sarah was weeping, exhausted. She looked at Clara.
I said I am sorry, Clara.
He is a fine boy, Clara said, wiping her hands. He is strong. You rest. She and Eli walked home in the gray, pre-dawn light. They did not speak. When she walked to the mercantile 2 days later, the town was different. People they did not whisper. They did not turn away. They waved. It was a small thing, a farmer, tipping his hat, a woman, Mary, nodding from her porch. But it was everything. They were not outcasts. They were neighbors. The peace lasted through the long, hot summer. Clara grew heavy. The potatoes in her garden were round and firm. Eli had added a wooden room onto the mud shack, with a real window. They had a home. And then the tragedy. It started as a smell. Late August. The air was yellow, thick, and dry as tinder. It was the smell of a forest burning. Eli saw it first, from the ranch. A plume of dark, ugly smoke, rising from the south hills. The wind was blowing north, toward the settlement, toward them. "It is a wildfire," Peterson said, his face gray. "And it is moving fast." They rode back. The wind was hot, carrying ash that fell like a gray, gritty snow. "It jumped the creek," Peterson yelled, riding through the small town. "We need every man. We have to dig a fire break at the ridge, or we lose it all. The town, the ranch, everything." Men were running, grabbing shovels, axes, wet blankets. Eli ran to his shack. Clara was standing in the doorway, her hand on her pregnant belly, her face pale. He grabbed his axe. He grabbed a shovel.
No, she said. She grabbed his arm. Her grip was like iron. Eli, no. Clara, I have to. No, it is not your fight. Let them fight it. What about us? What about the baby? Do not go. Please, Eli, do not leave me. She was begging, the terror of being left alone. It was older than him. He put his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain she knew. He was a man who ran. He ran from Texas. He ran from Wyoming. Clara, he said, his voice raw. This is our place. That is our home. That is our cross on that hill. I am not running anymore. I have to, for you. He kissed her, a hard, desperate kiss. Stay by the river. If the smoke gets bad, get in the water. I will come back. Eli, she screamed as he ran, but he was gone, joining the other men, running toward the wall of smoke. She waited. It was 3 days of hell. The sky turned a dark, sickly red. The sun was a copper coin, a thing without heat. The ash fell, covering her potato garden, covering the roof. The air was so thick, it hurt to breathe. She did not sleep. She packed their few things, the almanac, the baby's blanket, the blue kerchief of his brother's, which he had left in her care. She sat by the river, with Jed and Sal, and she watched the ridge. The fire roared. It sounded like a freight train. It sounded like the end of the world. On the 3rd day, the wind shifted. It blew back on itself, a saving grace. She waited all day and all night. And then he came. He was not walking. He was stumbling. He was a figure made of ash, a black ghost in the red dawn. Clara ran to him. He was undone. His hair was singed off. His eyebrows were gone. His duster was in tatters, full of burned holes. His hands were raw, blistered, bloody meat. He had been digging. He had been beating the fire with blankets, with his bare, ruined hands. He saw her. He tried to smile, but his face was cracked. It is done, he whispered. We held the ridge. The town is safe. He collapsed at her feet, by the door of their home. Clara did not speak. She did not panic. She sobbed. Deep, silent, racking sobs that shook her whole body. She was so full of terror and love and rage and gratitude. It nearly tore her apart. She helped him inside. She fetched water from the river. And she washed him. She took a soft rag. She washed the ash from his skin. She washed the soot from his face, revealing the man underneath. She washed his chest. She cleaned his ruined, terrible hands, crying as she did it. He just sat there, his head bowed, too exhausted to move. He let her take care of him. She washed the blackness away. Winter came. The first snow fell, clean and white, covering the black scarred hills. Clara was ready. It started in the middle of a cold night. It was not like Sarah's. It was not fast, it was slow, and it was wrong. She labored for a whole day. Eli stayed with her. He held her hand. He boiled water. He walked her. He did everything she said. But it was wrong. By the 2nd night, she was weak. The baby was stuck. She was bleeding. Eli, she whispered, her face pale as the snow outside. It is not coming. He was terrified. He was a man who could face gunfire. He was a man who could face a forest fire. He could not face this. He was helpless. I will get Mrs. Davies, he said, his voice frantic. I will get Sarah. No. Clara gripped his hand, her knuckles white. Do not leave me. Please, do not let me be alone. He saw it, the terror, the memory of the stairs, the memory of the blizzard. He stayed. But she was fading. She was losing too much blood. Her skin was cold. I am cold. Eli, she whispered, her eyes fluttering. I am so cold. That word, cold. It struck him like a bullet. He saw her, freezing on the mountain.
He saw her in the snowdrift. "No," he said. His voice was a low, vicious growl. "No, you are not." He got behind her. He wrapped her in every blanket they owned. He pulled her back against his chest, his arms locked around her. He put his strength into her. He poured his own heat into her body. "You are not dying," he commanded. "You are not going cold. Do you hear me, Clara? You are fire. That is what you are. You burn. You burn. You do not go cold. Not on me. Not now. You fight." He was holding her. He was begging her. He was willing her to live. "You fight, Clara." She screamed. It was a raw, animal sound. She arched her back, her hands gripping his arms. She bore down, with all the strength she had left. He held her. He held her through the worst of it. He was her anchor. He was her rock. And then a terrible, tearing quiet. A final, agonizing push. A small, wet, blue thing slid into his waiting hands. It was silent. It was not breathing. "No," Eli whispered. He took the baby. He cleared its mouth. He put his own mouth over its tiny, still face. He breathed. Once, he breathed his own life, his own fire, into its lungs. He breathed again. A cough, a sputter, and then a wail. A thin, high, furious cry that filled the small, warm cabin. Eli looked at Clara. He was crying, the tears cutting clean paths through the soot still on his face. She was pale. She was paper white, but she was smiling. "A daughter?" she whispered. "A daughter," he said, his voice thick. He laid the small, screaming baby on Clara's chest. What do we call her?" Clara asked, her hand stroking the baby's wet hair. Eli looked at his daughter. He looked at his wife, who had fought back from the cold, from the edge. He thought of the sheriff, who had let them go. He thought of the town that had finally let them in. He thought of this child, who had come through blood and fire and near death. "Mercy," he said. "We will call her Mercy." And so, the seasons turned. The scarred hills turned green again. The cabin grew. Eli built a real floor. He built a real bed. He built a cradle. The snow came again. It was a cold night. The wind howled outside, screaming down from the mountains. It was the same wind, the same hungry, lonely sound that had tried to kill her. But inside, it was not the same. Eli lit the fire in the new stone fireplace he had built. It was a big, strong fire. It threw light and warmth into every corner of the room. Clara was sitting in a rocking chair he had made, the one that did not look like a potato. She was nursing Mercy, humming a low, tuneless song. He sat on the hearth, just watching them. When the baby was asleep, Clara laid her in the cradle. She came and sat next to Eli. She leaned her head against his chest. He put his arm around her, and they watched the fire together. "Listen to that wind," she whispered, smiling. "It sounds angry." "It is just weather," he said. "I was thinking," she said, her voice soft, "about that first night, on the mountain, when I thought I was going to freeze. I was so cold. I thought it was the end. I hated that cold." He kissed the top of her head. He said nothing. "But it was not the end," she said. It was the blizzard that brought me to you. The cold. It saved me, Eli." He held her tighter. He looked at the woman in his arms. He looked at the child in the cradle. He looked at the solid table he had built and the warm fire he had lit. The wind could howl. It could not get in. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight and hope. She paid him in skin, and he gave her the one thing neither had ever known: peace. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.